Hi, everybody. Wayne Parham, Lone Star Audio Fest. I'm here with Norman Tracy of Audio Crafters Guild. How you doing,
And
Norman?
Purify.
Yes, Purify. I'm going to want to
I'm
get into that because I know you started doing stuff with them, and I want to learn more about that. But first, won't you tell
we'll
me
get
some
there.
stuff about you, how you grew up, what got you into audio, and then we'll just keep going until we learn about you and Audio Crafters Guild.
Okay. Well, my name's Norman Tracy. I'm a electrical engineer, uh, retired from working for corporate America and um, doing audio and hi-fi full time now as my retirement passion projects. I got started in audio. I just seem to be one of those people who's hardwired to love music. And I have an early memory of being about 8 or 10 years old. And my father graciously allowed me to play records on his big Stomberg Carlson console. And that's one of those names that's disappeared, but they were big in luxury radios and then stereo consoles. And when you take the back, I still have that console here in our home
That's
as
cool.
a treasured artifact. And when you take the back off of it, the amplifier in there is about the equivalent of an Audio Research D70. It's like a 50 watt with big power
Wow.
tubes. And from the top, it had all kinds of fun stuff for little 10-year-old Norman to play with, like the magic eye tubes that when you tune the radio, that
Yeah.
there'd be a little circle that would slowly come together as you brought the station in.
So cool. Yeah.
But recently I kind of closed that circle in that amongst my parents' records, one I really latched onto was the soundtrack for the musical South Pacific by Rodgers and Hammerstein. And I played that over and over. The looking back, you know, songs like There Ain't Nothing Like a Dame with its upbeat, jazzy tempos, even though I didn't quite understand the double entendres of all the lyrics at that point. Later, I came to understand. It's a bunch of horny sailors talking about women. So when they say there ain't nothing like a dame, and um, but of course also before John Williams, Rodgers and Hammerstein's were the king of great symphonic soundtracks, and it was the soundtrack from the movie version. So all the money you want was spent on the orchestration, the big sound stages, the golden age of Hollywood. So that is a high fidelity, capital H, capital F record that I just played over and over again. This came to mind because just last Sunday, here in I'm speaking from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Wayne and I both grew up, and where I still am. There is a high school here called Will Rogers High School, which is named after the famous movie star and vaudeville entertainer Will Rogers, who's sort of a favored son of Oklahoma, kind of our first celebrity back in the 1930s. And that high school was built during one of the periods when Tulsa was flush with oil money. And it is a beautiful Art Deco place. And there is an alumni association that puts on concerts that are not to be missed. And we were treated Sunday with the concert performance of the music from South Pacific. So I sat there luxuriating in that live sound. And it was just like 60 plus years had we closed the circle.
Isn't that something?
So the point is, the reason I'm into hi-fi is first music. And I'm just hardwired, one of those people that I have a pet theory that there's some of us that just, there's more nerves going between our auditory part of our brain and the pleasure centers. And it's just, we love it. We adore it. It becomes a passion, and some people go off and learn to play. Others of us are in the audience appreciating the work of great musicians. I got into the hardware side of it pretty early. Like a lot of little boys growing up in the 1960s, you had things like a slot car track. And I was the guy who learned to rewind the motors on my slot cars, which was an early way to learn about Ohm's law. They were much faster, but they seemed to get much hotter after you change the wiring and things like that. So it was a pretty easy transition. In those days, you started with the record player your mom and dad would give you, these little portable ones. And by the time I was a teenager, I had figured out how to get this little kit you could buy from the Radio Shacks that were everywhere and put a headphone jack on it. So probably you'd think my first high-fidelity component was summer job money was spent on a pair of COS 4A headphones. And I had wired that up to where I could plug them into my portable record player, and you could hear so much more of the music all of a sudden. And and so that was my first time for that audiophile cliche that I wanted to listen to all my records again. I could hear so much more music now with these headphones on. And pretty soon I was hooked, for sure. We all wanted music in our cars. And the first time I ever built a pair of speakers, I had a Volkswagen van, and it had an AM radio with one speaker. And I had bought a TAC cassette player with a massive 3 watts per channel. And my good friend Barry Thomas, who had helped me transition from listening to American pop music like the Monkees into the great British invasion bands like Rolling Stones, The Who, Led Zeppelin, the Byrds, and such. Barry showed up one day with 4 Jensen 6x9 speakers and a bunch of plywood and a drawing that had been made by one of the guys at the local hi-fi shop where he had bought the speakers. And using my dad's radial arm saw, we made 4 big, heavy plywood boxes to put in that thing. And that's the first speakers I DIY'd. I studied electrical engineering in college. Went to work for an oil company, Amoco, now disappeared into British Petroleum. But for 22 years, I worked for Amoco doing both IT work, starting with big iron mainframes, and then transitioning through Unix workstations and the early days of networking before Ethernet had even been established as a standard, where we were networking things together on coax cables and all kinds of obscure things that only IT people of our generation would even have ever been exposed to. But I wanted to get back into electrical engineering, and I was very fortunate that Amoco had a in-house seismic data recorder that they had a patent on called the Seismic Group Recorder, SGR. And I got to join that group as they did a blank sheet redesign of the entire product. And it was great because there was a wonderful mentorship. And I learned, the things that you don't learn in college about how large projects are managed and designs are taken from concept through specification, through prototyping, through production, through rollout, through field support. in the fields. And the other great thing as an audiophile, and I was a hardcore audiophile by then, recording seismic data is sound waves.
Yeah.
Except, instead of the sound in a concert hall, it's the sound of the earth vibrating as the sonic waves that are bounced off of the strata and the rocks down in the earth are recorded, and that makes underground maps that oil companies use to look for pockets of oil to drill into. So it's, except for the fact that you're only interested in frequencies from about 10 hertz to a couple hundred hertz, it's exactly the same thing as a digital audio recording. And this was in the mid 80s, so this was just as CD was hitting. My journey into high-end audio, of course, was greatly shaped by every month we would wait, and of course, in those days, sometimes the publishing was a little irregular, but when your new issue of Stereophile or the Absolute Sound finally hit your mailbox, you'd grab it and just devour it. And so the writings of Harry Pearson, the founder of the Absolute Sound magazine, and J. Gordon Holt, the founder of Stereophile magazine, both of those guys preached a gospel of your hi-fi should be referenced to the sound of live acoustic music, instruments playing in a good concert space, that's your touchstone. And the idea of facsimile reproduction, where we try and recreate that sound in our living rooms. That's, to this day, that is a kind of my guiding star, and how we keep from going off to, boom boxes and such that, lots of extra bass may be fun for a while, but then if you refresh your ears like I did last Sunday at that concert, which was largely acoustic, and a particular high note was when there's a couple of numbers where there's an entire chorus of male and female vocals playing the sailors and the nurses, and the story covered that stage from end to end, and your hearing is reset, and you're reminded why we love music so much and what it really sounds like in a real space being put on by accomplished artists. I think that's about the 3-minute version of Norman's history there in hi-fi.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I want to go back to a couple of places. One, since you and I both have some mutual friends at Amico Research, tell me a little more about what you did there, and in particular, our buddy Mike McNabb. He mentored me, and I think you'd mentioned before he mentored you. Then also, I kind of want to know more about that era you were talking about, like high school days when you built the speaker boxes with the Jensen 6x9s, and then you start, you went to college, and you had to have a lot of hobby projects then, and I'd like to know more about that, because that's kind of your roots. Tell me a little more about that.
And remind me the name of your mentor.
It was Mike McNabb, electrical engineer. Yeah, I think you had mentioned you worked with him.
Mike McNabb. Yeah, that's my 70-year-old brain was trying to remember his name, and I think I had forgotten that he was one of the Mikes. At one point in our group that was designing the SGR project, I think at one point we had 5 different Mikes. Yeah. And Mike McNabb was one of the outstanding ones.
Yes, he is.
And of course, that was very much a pivotal moment or time of my life. As I already mentioned, I was learning the actual real world practice of electrical engineering. And another one of the Mikes was named Mike Ross, and he set me up on a blind date with his his sister. And this year we're celebrating our 37th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
So
That
the
is
date went
so
really
cool.
well. And 3 wonderful sons and a passel of grandchildren later. So that part was really great. I was always taking what I learned, and it was a golden age there. It was the Amico Research Center that had been in Tulsa since the 1950s. And I had been taken there as a little boy because my father also worked there as Bill Tracy, George William Bill Tracy, who's well known he's what's called a reservoir engineer, who are the engineers that oversee producing oil fields and maximize the yield out of them. He was, the golden age of post-war America. He helped found that field and did a lot of early research. And as a little boy, I was taken out there when he would go check on his computer jobs back in the days when he was programming Fortran on punch cards.
Yeah.
So I got into the family business, as it were, and had worked my way up to this this group of about, I guess at our height, we may have had 10 or 12 engineers and technicians, and I was what was called a senior research technician at the time, who were designing and perfecting this seismic recorder system. And I got to work on things that included the analog to digital converter, which in the 1980s we were had 22-bit resolution, which is something yes, you can do that because particularly since our signals were low frequency enough. And one way that seismic signals are unlike music is they start big and then they decrease. So by putting an automatic gain control in front of the signal, and while the signal's going away, you ramp it up, keeping recording that number in the samples, you can get amazing dynamic range. So from an audiophile point of view, very early on, I was used to that we were dealing with signals you couldn't see on an oscilloscope. When we'd be testing those A to D converters with sine waves, and we would attenuate them, and you'd watch them just disappear into the noise. And then later, when you print out the data and print and reconstitute those waves, there they are. They've been recorded. So that was, it helps me keep an open mind in some of the things that people want to immediately dismiss as voodoo and snake oil and high-end audio. They could be that, but they could also be something that's just extremely difficult to measure and would require a $100,000 project to set up the conditions where you can actually measure it, but you can hear it. So keep an open mind in that regard. But during that period, one thing that was, it got me plugged into, in those days, some parts were very difficult to get. And DigiKey, where you could buy electronic components in small quantities. And so we started, and we also had the Audio Amateur magazine. Ed Dell was the publisher, correct? And I got in seriously into that. And at that point, it was guiding us with mentors like Walt Jung, who would teach us how to use op-amps for high-end audio and how to select them. And we were swapping the op-amps on our CD players and improving the power supplies. And it was very, very handy to be working at a major oil company's research center during that period, because they were very liberal about allowing us to bring in our own stuff. And so when the day's over, I'd stay after work and would use all the equipment, the Tektronix oscilloscopes and the Hewlett-Packard signal generators and the good soldering irons and all that. I would be modifying CD players. Also being connected into other sources for electronic components, because, when you call and say, I'm with Amico and would like to buy some parts, they had just, yes, sir. How much, sir?
Yeah.
A very turning point in that was, the first CD players with SP diff ports, Sony Philips digital interface ports, started showing up, like in the late 80s, early 90s, when the digital signal off of a CD was available to the outside world. And that was very exciting. And I found a source. Yamaha actually was one of the first companies that had integrated circuits that would receive an SPDIF signal and decode it. And that was a key building block if you wanted to design your own external digital to analog converter. Well, with the stroke of being at Amico, I could, I got a couple samples of those ICs.
Yeah.
And established where I could buy them, 5 or 10 or 20 at a time. And using those, I designed my first hi-fi digital to analog converter. It was also very handy, and one of the engineers in our seismic recorder group used some of his budget to buy the first generation audio precision test instrument. And of course, that company was to go forward, and to this day they are the standard. If you're looking in Stereophile magazine or Audio Science Review or Soundstage, they're all using audio precisions to measure stuff. And we got hold of one of those. And again, I could use it on off hours to find out what the distortion I was getting out of my D-Day converters. Filter, and I was also learning how to lay out printed circuit boards. And so I mixed all those skills together and sourced and started doing batches of PCBs and putting together kits. And I formed a company I called Audio Crafters Guild, as a little side hustle, and started selling kits and DACs. I called it the X DAC, and I did fairly well with it in a niche, and I would sell you just the blank circuit board and a manual. You can go make it, or the popular thing was I'd sell you the circuit board and the big, the SPDIF receiver chip and the main D-to-A chip. And then you go off and source the rest of the parts, or I'd sell you a complete kit, or I would even sell you a turnkey DAC. And that was fun, but it was always a side hustle. And by then, as I'd mentioned a moment ago, I'd married, kids, and so it was a side hustle that started and kept going until now, frankly. And you can go to audiocrafterguild.com right now and see what's going on, although that site is in dire need of an upgrade, but it'll get you in contact with me if you're interested in what we're doing.
Well, that's perfect. You kind of segue now up to where you and I met, because that's the Norman I remember. I think Audio Crafters Guild, when you and I met, was doing a lot of D to A and that type of stuff.
Yep.
So that's perfect. Yeah, tell me what was your mode of operation in, say, the around Y2K, and how Audio Crafters Guild has has moved forward in the last 20 years?
Well, I was always still interested in speakers. So about the time we first met, I had started to fool around with building my own speakers. Um, the and in the late '90s, early aughts was a period where there was what I call the triode revival going on amongst audiophiles in North America. They had, thanks to Joe Roberts and his Sound Practices magazine, and also the fact that we'd sort of all found each other on the internet.
Yeah.
And there was a great deal of interest in low-powered single-ended triode amplifiers and the speakers that work with them. And I had become extremely enamored, with this speaker from Fostex called the FE103.
I remember it. Yep.
Which is just a little 4-inch paper cone driver that they've made millions of, and they were in all kinds of table radios and portable tape recorders and all the stuff from the golden age of Japanese consumer electronics manufacture. But they were also highly revered amongst the triode aficionados in Japan, and we got wind of that. And although they didn't have much dynamics and no bass, because they were phase coherent, a small full range with a cone that weighs almost nothing. There was an immediacy and a presence and an image about those things that was just really addictive. And when you and I first got to know each other, and we had a group of folks in the northeastern Oklahoma area that had like minds, and we would meet in each other's homes and, show each other what we were working on. It's the first time I got to hear Lowther speakers. It was at one of those meetings, and Audio Node Electronics at one of those meetings.
Yeah.
So by the time you put on the first Great Plains Audio Fest in Tulsa, I joined in on that, and I had an exhibit room, and I was showing. I called my design the Ones, ONE's uppercase Z. The Ones was my little speaker using the FE103, and I was showing that at that show.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember now that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going.
Oh, no, it's I've found that the best the best profit I've had from my audiophile practice has been the friendships that are made and the relationships. So I'd be remiss if I didn't call up my friend Leo McIntyre,
Sure.
who we lost last year.
Yeah.
Leo was about 20 years older than I am. So he was in his early 90s when he passed, but I got to know him. We had a wonderful high-end shop here called the Phonograph, and I was in there once, and there was this beautiful air-bearing tone arm they had on their big system in the big room.
I remember.
The big Magnapans and Mark Levinson Electronics and stuff live. And I was like, oh, that is a beautiful tone arm. Wow, I'm so impressed. That sounded great. And the salesman said, oh, yeah, that's actually made here in Tulsa. Ooh, would you like to meet that guy? Oh, could I? Oh no. And, I was given a phone number, which is how we got in touch with each other back then. And before I knew it, I was at Leo's house listening to his Magnapans and his audio research and his air-bearing tone arm. And we became fast friends for the next 40 years. And at that first Great Plains Audio Fest, I had one of his tone arms, and I borrowed his Audio Research SP3 preamp for the system. And so that is very, very important memory to me. And that friendship of ours, I mean, we were at each other's weddings, and kids were born. We were, best friends. And it's fun. Leo could talk all the way back to the mono days of back when they were transitioning from one speaker to two for this new stereo thing. So he was a great resource to learn about the history of hi-fi and the entire post-war era, all the way up to high end.
Yeah, I remember him too. He was a great guy. And I think, wasn't Phonograph at 61st a Memorial back then? I remember that shop.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember Leo coming to several of either the Great Plains or the Lone Star Audio Fest in the early
That was the
days.
Great Plains.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes,
well, hey, now that brings us up to, you'd mentioned earlier, Pure Art 5. Tell us more about that relationship, what you guys do together, and how that formed.
It's kind of a same song, next verse. As I said, one of the great things about Hind Audio is the people you meet, the relationships that are formed. Pure Art 5 came about because about 6 years ago, in the trade press, there was this buzz going on about this new company that had been formed in Denmark. And when you read the people who had been brought on board, it was very much, if you're in the know in the industry, it was a who's who of in the Danish, and of course the Scandinavians are extremely important when it comes to loudspeaker drivers technology. Peerless, C's, ScanSpeak. The list goes on, and it goes way back to classic designs like the Dynaco A30 with its C's woofers. That so throughout the history of post-war hi-fi, the Danish have been very important. So there's this new company, and they're called Purify, and they had undertaken a multi-year R&D effort to get distortion out of loudspeaker drivers. And the scuttlebutt was they had some pretty interesting successes. And I devoured everything I could about what they were doing, which includes improvements in things like the magnetic structure, the voice coil, and the linearity. And then they had made what was a couple of breakthrough discoveries, one being the strange hysteresis distortions caused by having iron in the magnetic circuit, and also how the surround of the speaker can contribute to distortion. And at that time, they haven't quite turned over all those cards for us to know exactly what they were doing, but people that got hold of the first drivers they let out were raving about how these sounded. And when they went on sale, they didn't yet have a U.S. distributor. And I established a group buy on DIYaudio.com. Excuse me. And I was just wanting to get 2 or 3 guys. I think the best price break was when you bought 8 woofers at a time. So I just thought, if I can get 3 more guys that want woofers, we can save a few bucks on bringing these over from Denmark. And we ended up bringing about 40 drivers in because as the meme goes, this got out of hand quickly. And this was just before COVID hit. So the drivers were a little bit delayed, but everybody got their drivers. And so it gave us projects to do during the unpleasantries that were to follow. And so I feel I can claim with some authority to be a very early adopter of Purify drivers in North America. And the hope and anticipation I had for them was borne out. I mean, I found quickly that just slapping them in any box and they would sound wonderful because they are a breakthrough in the reduction of distortion and in the linearity, and also in the ability to put out about an extra octave of bass in any given driver size and enclosure size compared to previous technologies. And there was a tremendous amount of postings being done on DIYaudio.com on the threads we had just started for the Purify loudspeaker drivers. And I was contacted there by a guy named Paul Stover, who introduced himself as he was in Colorado and he was a woodworker, cabinet maker. Okay, nice. And would we like to collaborate? And it started as just I designed some speakers. He'd do really nice cabinets using his considerable skills in hardwoods and woodworking and cabinet making. And we both have a nice pair of speakers. Well, again, that got out of hand quickly, and we really liked how they turned out. That was the speaker that became the Purify LS6, which uses the original Purify 6.5-inch woofer, paper cone woofer, with a GR Research Neo 3 tweeter and a waveguide, and is still our top end product. Paul has an interesting story. He moved to the Aspen area of Colorado in the 1970s because of love of skiing and the other sports that the Colorado lifestyle affords. And he and his wife bought a mountaintop, literally the top of a mountain, about 30 miles from Aspen, where they live to this day. And Paul built them a log cabin that over the years got expanded into a log house. And he built his shop there. And he established a career that goes on to this day as a supplier of custom furniture, custom millwork, and architectural work, woodworking for the millionaires and billionaires who compete to have the nicest houses in Aspen and the surrounding area. So, some of his stuff is in Microsoft founders' homes in that area and such. And I think the last project he finished was a 9-foot long walnut bar for somebody's house that he just came off of. So when I say that his craftsmanship is beyond compare, I'm just blown away by what he can do with wood. And we are going forward with that. I've strategically located here in this part of the picture is our latest introduction, the LS4, which during the development we called it the FF1, but we're going to call it the LS4 as we're as we speak. Paul is working on the first production batch of those that we're doing a drop that we're going to make available to people who are interested. It uses it's the same recipe of a waveguide planar tweeter. This is the 4-inch Purify woofer, the PTT40, and it's just a cute little guy that I just can't say enough about the bass you're going to get out of these guys. So, this is what I mean about Paul's work. So, we have the dovetail joints. This solid walnut, paper stone front baffle. And this one uses the classic styling with the inset baffle. And people are always asking about this surround, and that's one of the magic potions in the Purify mix that gives it the very low distortion, because conventional surrounds actually change their area as the driver is moving in and out and in and out. This area changes, which is a direct first order cause of distortion. So this strange undulating in and out surround completely eliminates that, because its area stays the same. And I'm just addicted to these babies.
They really are gorgeous. I've ever since you started bringing them, I've just lusted over the looks of those things. They're just gorgeous. And now I hear the story of that woodworker, and I see that. That is very cool. Plus the technology of that woofer. Where do you see this going? And two questions actually. Where do you see this going, and what is your typical setup? How do you like to set up those speakers in a room?
Well, those are two entirely different questions.
Totally different questions.
Where we're going is the our larger speaker, the LS6. Those are built to order, because leaning in and taking advantage of Paul's abilities and connections in the fine cabinetry area. The idea there is for the client to choose the particular species and finishes of wood they want in their speakers. And so those are a commission piece. They have low 5-figure price tags. We're bringing the LS4 in at a more accessible price tag, under $5,000 a pair. So we're going to batch those out as, and so we'll be doing drops of those to get the price down. So the answer to your question is, where we're going is we're trying to make it more accessible, to where you can get the incredible transparency and dynamics and bass depth and low distortion of Purify technology and the tweeter neo planar in a waveguide, and Paul's incredible craftsmanship in the materials. One of the things I found in this journey with Paul and is the importance of materials. One thing that really took me by surprise, our first prototype of the LS6, Paul sent me a flat pack that was all MDF that I assembled and painted to get it looking pretty nice and put together. And I was just, I love the sound. And I have a group of guys, friends, that most Wednesday nights we meet and then have some barbecue and then come over here for listening. And everybody was blown away about how wonderful and good that thing sounded. And it's all just thumbs up. Yes. We took that to production. And when I got the first one, where that MDF baffle was now an over inch thick piece of walnut that had been CNC'd into the shape, the difference that made in the sound was a big surprise to me. How much improved, how much, I like to say quieter, because the microscopic vibrations of a speaker cabinet I've come to learn make so much difference. And of course, throughout the high-end loudspeaker industry, people are trying anything and everything to address that issue.
Constraint layers.
We're just having great luck with combination of solid hardwoods and constrained layer dampening and lip mask dampening and just every trick in the book. So that's where we're going, is to try and bring this to a more accessible price point, because it's always been the bang for the buck has been a passion of mine. You know, as a middle class guy myself, who has a few extra $1,000 a year to maybe do an upgrade on my hi-fi, not 50,000 or 100,000. So I love the fact that this will be more financially accessible for people. That's not to say we're going to abandon. I would like to do something even above the LS6 if we find the right client who's interested in, say, the 8-inch or 10-inch Purify drivers. Yeah, we could do something there that is quite spectacular, I promise you. And so, there's always that next design in the works. But right now, it's all hands on deck to get out this LS4. As far as setting them up, a good set of stands. I like them on the long wall myself because I'm kind of an imaging freak and love to paint a big wide VistaVision panorama sound stage. If you look at our published frequency responses, you'll see that on axis, above 10 kilohertz, there's a rise. So I tend to not toe them in too much, because the power response in the room, when they're straightforward or just towed in just a little bit, is very smooth, and there's plenty of highs throughout the room. And I'll hasten to add and remind people that a little extra above 10 kilohertz does not make a bright speaker. It's between 3 kilohertz and 8 kilohertz. If you have a big bump there, then you get the brightness. So anyway, that's the plan with your art flag.
Well,
And a good way and how to use it.
I'm impressed on two reasons. One, I'm impressed that you have considered, the reverberant field, the entire room, because that's kind of a big deal to me too. So I'm impressed with that. And then what I'm also impressed with. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, this loops back to, when you first moved the show to Texas and called it Lone Star Artifice, those first few years, that was such a golden age where people like Getty and others were, and you yourself, were exploring the how beneficial a wide, even power response is. And at that time, in the early aughts and the 2010s, that was a big deal. I remember some of those systems were real ear openers, as far as the fact that, wow, I can walk around this whole room and the sound all sounds really great. And so I took those lessons to heart, and as have many other designers. It's just part and parcel with designing a high-end loudspeaker in 2026, and you got to cover that base.
Yeah, I agree. I think the same way, and so I was impressed with that your focus is power response, not just on axis. Which, of course, with having a waveguide kind of in a way goes without saying. Another thing I'm impressed with, though, is I can see you've got both areas covered. You've got the guy that's going to get a speaker for a few $1,000. That's attainable to most anybody that's going to get hi-fi. Then you also can make a real statement piece. So you've got both of those covered, and I'm impressed with that, Norman.
Thanks. The they're never going to be ubiquitous. I mean, that it's even the LS4, the production will be limited, and some people may need to wait for the next production run.
Sure.
So if you're interested, you might want to get in touch with us and learn about it and get on the list. Paul still has his architectural wood cabinet making and woodworking business going, and so we're going to batch these out and when he's between the big jobs that pop up.
Well, yeah, that's something I've noticed. Really any of the good stuff, you have to have a little patience. Most of the time, you're not going to get what you really want if you're just picking it up off the showroom floor. You're buying something that someone's custom built for you. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of a delay sometimes between placing the order and actually receiving it. But I'm excited to for people to be able to see and hear this stuff at the next show. I guess between now and then, where else? And when I say the next show, of course, I'm talking Lone Star Audio Fest. But where else can they see and hear your speakers and your electronics?
Long pause. Get in touch with us, and we will see what we can arrange. Particularly in the Midwest, Danny Ritchie, who's helped us out with crossovers, and we get components from Danny, the tweeter, and crossover parts. He's very gracious. So he's just about finished up his new. He's putting the last cosmetic touches on his dedicated listing room of GR Research in Audiophiles, Texas. And he's very graciously said people can come there and hear these. And we can set up personal listening sessions. And there's other things we can do. And we have somebody who's going to visit, who's going to be in the Colorado area. And we have someone scheduled to hear them at Paul's place, which I can assure you will be a big treat. I mean, it's just, you go by the last store and then it's about a 20-minute drive up into the mountains to get to Paul's place. It's just, and they're very gracious hosts. And, we don't have dealers. We don't, at least not yet. And so I'm looking at other hi-fi shows, but there's a lot of moving parts in making that happen. So nothing as we speak is scheduled right now. We'll be demoing, but we pretty much make every Lone Star. We're there.
Yeah, and, that's how I do it too. So I think what I'm hearing is if people want to reach out to you, they need to contact you at audiocraftersguild.com. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Let's clarify that. That's a good point. I still have audiocrafterguild.com, and certainly you can contact me through there.
Okay.
There's some kits and some speaker kits that are for the more do-it-yourself oriented guy, and that they're made out of Baltic birch and not the really fancy stuff we get out of Paul's hands. Pureartfi.com is the place to go if you're interested in that. Pureartfi.com. There's a contact button there, and if you just fill that in, we can get in touch that way. Whether you just want to be on the mailing list and hear the updates, or watch, I'm going to start putting some blogs up there and to watch things, or customers, whether by email or we exchange phone numbers and talk, and or WhatsApp, and discuss what your needs and desires regarding speakers and hi-fi. People have questions about amplifier shape compatibilities, which these things work very, very well with, with tubes once you get about 30 watts per channel. We don't want to do any major head banging, but they also, they do love the power. And so if you want to give them hundreds of watts, they'll just soak it up and pin you back into something. it's great fun. But then there's lots of other questions, and particularly if you're interested in some LS6s, we can talk about wood finishes and species and all that fun stuff.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So that's how they need to get a hold of you, is from Pure Art Fine, and that's PUREARTFI.com. Yes.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, they can reach you at that website, and then of course at the next Lone Star Audio Fest they can see you, and I think we're going to do that. We always do that the first weekend in May, so we'll do that again. What else is there anything else that you'd like everybody to know about you, Norman?
Do this for the passion. And the my latest thing, I've as I said, back in the 80s I started playing around with digital audio. I do love my analog though. I have a problem with turntables. I think I own 5 right now. and no, and different phono stages, and I have the guy with the box full of cartridges as well, and 1,000 LPs. The Pure Art 5 speakers are they're so transparent to the source. I continue to find as I improve my system, they just get better and better. The recent example I showed up with at the Lone Star Audio Fest we just had was I partnered with a company called SOTM out of South Korea, and they are digital audio specialists, and their little their server and USB reclockers and power supplies are and they're a revelation. How much better they made my DACs sound. I've settled into for many years now I've been using DACs with USB inputs, and I didn't want it to make a difference. I want to just be able to plug it into a laptop, or I've built PCs for years, and usually built our home PCs from motherboards and cases and such. So I have a nice media PC that's built just for audio and video, and so I didn't want it to make that much difference because I wanted to, to not have to spend that money and that extra complexity. But it's if you're like your typical audiophile who we like to just, what's the next thing I do to polish up my system and get even more resolution and more just, particularly, it's got me listening to a lot more classical music because it's just so beautiful. Or my love of musical theater, or big band jazz. I mean, it's just I'm not sure if it's a reduction in jitter or noise. And one of my mentors taught me about just how pernicious noise is. That just it's like the rabbits getting past the gates into my wife's garden. They find the littlest little holes to squeeze through, and noise is the same way. So the combination of the reclocking and the noise reduction that they're bringing has it's been quite a revelation. That's a hint. Free advice for my fellow audiophiles. Look into the digital source. It's just like it was when we were playing this CD transports back in the 90s. And I actually, wrote a paper for Ed Dell in the Audio Amateur when we were first figuring out how jitter was getting past the SP diff receivers and their phase lock loops, and affecting the sound so much. And there's similar things going on with USB. And so I've been having a lot of fun exploring that area.
Wow, that is interesting, and I sense that there's a little hint in there. I'll be anxious to hear what you've done. Well, I think we're about to the end of our hour. You're such an interesting guy, Norman. I am really glad that you come to the shows every year. So, yeah, we'll talk again. But until then, everybody, enjoy your music. Thanks, Norman.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.